The yield varies enormously from conditions of growing. And biotechnology is not the factor that determines the yield. As a matter of fact, if biotechnology in some of these crops reduces the quality of the soil, as in some cases it might, then that could reduce the yields, because the richness of the soil and its nutrient components will improve the yield. And if that is declined because of some of the products in biotechnology, such as the use of herbicides constantly infiltrating the soil, then you will have a negative outcome on yield. So there's no consistency one way or the other on yield in biotechnology. Its primary purpose is not necessarily to create a greater food supply for the world, but it's to create economic benefits both for the farmer producer and for the seed producer. Those are the two primary economic benefits that they're looking at. Certainly not to produce food at cheaper value for the consumer or better quality food for the consumer. I remember when they produced this bioengineered tomato. Very early in the development of biotechnology, they had the flavor saver tomato. And its purpose was to produce a tomato that you can actually pick red, ripened, and transport without it getting soft. So it had to have some kind of genetics in it that would delay the ripening process. And it worked. I actually bought a box for my class, and I tested it, and it took a much longer time to ripen. But it didn't taste very good. I mean, I wasn't getting any, I wouldn't necessarily buy it just because it could last longer on my shelf unless it had a really good taste. So that whole technology failed. We don't see a bioengineered tomato on the market now. And they couldn't get all the things they wanted and also get the taste that they wanted. But the primary purpose of it was so that they can transport it long distances and it would still remain without softening. That was their primary purpose. The FDA is in charge of labeling food. And they have a provision for mandatory labeling, which is good, how much sodium is in food, trans fats, etc. It's good. I look at those labels. And then they have voluntary labeling also. Halal, is it, do they kill animals when they're catching tuna, etc.? So there's different kinds of labeling in food. And they decided that because they believe that genetically engineered food is no different than traditional food, that there's no requirement for them for mandatory labeling. As a matter of fact, they would oppose mandatory labeling because of there has to be a substantive difference in the material components of the food for there to be labeling. So FDA refused to label the food under their laws, under their regulations. So then the states started passing their own labeling laws. Well, the food industry was concerned that there would be a patchwork of labeling laws. California has labeling for certain chemicals that other states don't have, and you'll often see a label that says, this substance is considered as a hazard in the California state, under Proposition 65, whatever. But it'll have to have a label if they want to sell it in California. And we in Massachusetts will see that label. So the biotech industry did not like the idea that states were beginning to label the food, and Vermont was further along on that. They were ready to implement its labeling law when Monsanto had lobbied the Congress to pass a national labeling law that would preempt any state from issuing a labeling law. So now the Congress passed a labeling law for GMOs, which has not been implemented yet and is very vague about how the food will be labeled and which foods will be labeled. You may have to call a number if you want to find out. You may have to have a special kind of app on your cell phone and shine it in front of a tag on a thing. I can't imagine a lot of people would be doing something too difficult just to get the information, but it's a cumbersome, not clear labeling law that has yet been put into practice. I don't know when it will be, but it actually preempted a simpler, more direct labeling law that was going to be put forth in Vermont, and which passed it was litigated by Monsanto and actually met the court's criteria when it was tested. So it was ready to go. But now we have a national law, but nobody has yet seen it in operation or know how effective it will be.